Now we're going to move on to a different model of bee house. This is for bumblebees. And to start, we're going to take 2 pieces. I have some pre-cut wood here. The dimensions for what pieces you need can be found on our website. And there's also a nice cutting pattern layout there for you to follow. But here I have the front and middle piece. And I'm going to take this template that I printed off from our website, lay it down, and trace the hole that we're going to end up cutting out. So there's one hole. And now I'm going to do the same to this other middle piece. So these holes act as the entry and exit way for the bumblebees to go through when they're entering the house. Just finish the connection there. And now I'm going to head over to the drill press with the circular saw bit. Essentially, it just cuts holes right out of the middle of some wood. And I'm going to drill the rest of these pieces as well, and we'll be right back. On this drill press, I have a circle hole cutter. You could also put this on just the handheld drill. It's 1 inch in diameter, and that's what we're going to use to cut out the circles that we marked with the template earlier. Not quite through yet, so we're going to keep going. There we go. So you can see that bit just cut a hole right out of the middle. And we're going to do the same again to the other piece that we marked. We're going to do the same again to this piece. Use the circle hole cutter to cut a 1-inch circle out of the board that we marked earlier. There we go. And another hole cut out of the middle of the board. So here I have the 2 side pieces, and I'm going to use the other template that we have on our website to mark the corner pieces, which will end up being the ventilation holes. I'll take this, and you'll notice it's not the full 13 3/4 inches because we wanted to be sure it was printable on 8.5 by 11 paper. But we'll line it up in the corner here, mark the circle, just like that. And then, because we'll end up having the 2 sides stand like this together, we'll want to do the same to this side. So now we have our 2 side pieces marked, and we're going to take those over to the drill press, cut those circles out with the same bit like we did the front and middle pieces, and then we'll get to drilling and we'll be back. There's one hole, 1 inch in diameter, cut out of this side, and now we're going to do the other one. And now, cut through. Hole number 2, cut out of the other side. And we're going to drill the rest of the boards, and we'll be back. As long as everything's lined up, and you make sure that you mark it where it will be right in the center of this board here. Everything will be fine. You want it in the center of that board so that, there we go, kind of like building a card house, but so that you don't split the wood or send it through the side, the screw, so you don't send it through the side or anything like that. Now that I have it lined up, I'm just going to make a few markings, 2 on each side, 1 screw for the back side, 1 screw will be up front here. The same on the other side. Now all of these markings, it might be a little difficult here at the start because there's nothing quite screwed into place yet, but as soon as we get these pieces screwed together, everything will be quite a bit easier because there'll be some more stability to it. I'm going to start with this piece, get it attached to the sides, mark the other pieces, and be back shortly. The screws that we'll end up using are going to be 1 5/8 inches, and they'll be deck screws so that they're coated to hold up a little better outdoors. But here, we're going to flip it over, maybe stack some items under it to help stabilize it a little better when we go to get the bottom put on. One more. There we go. Bring it over to the edge so that we can clamp it to the table. So that'll just act as a little stabilizer. All right. Just need a little bit more under there, and that should be golden, actually. There we go. Then we'll clamp it up. We'll do the same on the other side. And then we'll have a little bit more of a stable base to work with. Then we'll get the rest underway. So here, with the drill, we're going to complete these pilot holes here so that the screws go in a little smoother. Tighten that a little bit. And do the same on this side. Take this drill over here, gently screw the screws in. One and number 2 on this side. There we go, and that side being attached to the bottom is done. And we'll flip it around and do the other. We want to make sure that the vent holes are lined up this way. Should be able to see through by looking through both of them. Go on this side. One, and then finally over here. Move that out of the way before we put in this final screw on the bottom. There we go. We want these holes lined up so you can see right through them, so that the vent holes are on the inside part where the colony will be, and we'll talk about that later. But we want them on the same side so that they're in the right cavity of the house, which will end up having 2 sections. Now we'll take those pieces that we drilled the holes in before, and they're going to end up sliding in 1 for the front, 1 for the middle. It'll actually be a little shorter than the middle, and then 1 piece for the back. So I'm going to flip it on its side, figure out where I need these drilled, And then we'll go drill the holes, be back, attach it all together, and then the last step will be putting some cotton in, a little bit of cardboard, and then attaching the top. And you'll notice that I'm marking 2 holes on either side of the pieces. And that is just to help secure it in place a little better. So I have one towards the top, one towards the bottom. And then we'll actually end up drilling through these pieces into these. And we can do that with the hand drill. It makes it a little easier because it'll stabilize everything, and we'll actually only have to do it in one step instead of going over to the drill press and then switching and completing the pilot holes. So I'm going to finish marking each of these pieces. And it'll be important to remember that the front, the one with the hole, actually goes on the side opposite of the other holes that we drilled earlier. So the holes go on opposite ends of the bee house, and you'll see why in a little bit. Where did they go? And also the other thing to note when lining these holes up, with the middle and the front piece, as you'll see them labeled here, the front when it's out front and the middle when it's towards the middle should line up like the other pieces so that you can see right through them, because that's going to be the entryway, and we want to make sure that they're all in a line so that the bumblebees have a straight path into the colony. And bumblebees, unlike solitary bees, are a variety of colonizing bees. They are native, but they do colonize. And that's why these houses look a bit different, because they'll have a communal space where they'll form colonies. And now I'm going to clamp this piece in, get the back in there as well. And if you don't have clamps, it's not too big of a deal, because you can just have someone help you hold them together or place some other pieces of wood inside to prop it up. But other than that, clamps are very nice to help attach it to the workbench and keep everything steady. I finished marking this side, so I'm going to grab this drill here and then drill all the way through this board into the other boards a little bit to make a nice pilot hole so the screw can go through smoothly. And then we'll do the same on the other side before we start filling it with the nesting material. And then go over here. Line it up. And these last 2 holes on this side, and then we'll screw them in and flip it over. There we go. Now that all of those holes are drilled, I'm going to grab some screws and screw this side in. The bottom took 4 screws. Each side is going to take 6. 2 for each of these smaller pieces that runs down between the walls. Finally on this side. There we go. Now we're going to loosen it, flip it over. You can see on the inside how we have 2 cavities, and we'll get to what each of those is in just a second. But an overview is that back here is where we're going to put some nesting material to make the colony. And then down here is going to be what we call the mud room, where they wipe whatever they don't want to bring into the colony off in there. But now we're going to flip it over, clamp it back down, and drill some more and screw the last bit of screws in for this part of the process. Be sure to mark it again. Bring that one down maybe a little bit. And now, I'll drill these pilot holes once again so the screws go in a little easier. Then we'll attach this piece onto the midsections and we'll get to filling it. Now that I've drilled pilot holes for all of these, I'm going to take some screws and attach it all together. There we go. So the main part of the Bumblebee house is put together now. You can see how these holes are lined up, and then the front 2 holes are lined up as well. So now we're actually going to get to filling the house with what needs to be inside of it, and we're going to start with a little bit of corrugated cardboard. And that'll go in the front mud room section of this assembly. And corrugated cardboard comes in a few different kinds. Most trifold poster boards are made out of it, and you can actually just rip that front paper covering off, and you'll see what the part that we need looks like in just a second. But before we get there, we're going to take some of this screen. You don't need this much. This is just the only roll that we found it in, and cut a few 2-inch by 2-inch squares out of it. So I'm going to cut a larger section first. Move that off to the side. And this is just window screen. So you can find it in rolls, but other fine screens will work as well. But now I'm going to cut this into 2 smaller sections and trim it a little bit. So the screens that we just cut are going to go on the inside to cover these ventilation holes, and we'll do one on each side, like that. And I like to attach them with a staple gun, but you can also find another way to do it. So I have just a paint stir stick right here, and I'm going to cut that into a flap that will cover this piece of the house, the ventilation hole. So maybe I'll mark it around there. So I'll take that. I can even use you can use a scissors to cut it because of how soft the material is. And you just go and cut it off from the rest of the paint stir stick. Might have to go from either side. There we go. So there's one, and that is going to go right here to cover that. And then we'll do the same for another piece. Just like this. Mark it around the same length. Cut it off. Here's what corrugated cardboard is. On one side, originally it might look like this. And that's where it might be, say, a trifold board. And then once you rip this front piece off, it'll turn into something that looks like this. So this is what we're going to cut into a small section to put right inside this front part of the house. So we can estimate from up here about how long we need it. We need it to go right about there. And I'm just going to cut along there. And just take that piece and put it right inside there. So that I have to trim it just a little bit so that it fits nicely. And there we go. The mudroom section of this bee house is complete. So that little piece of corrugated cardboard is where the bees will go in and pretty much wipe off whatever they don't want to track into the colony. So that is cut just to fit right over that hole there. And that will act as a flap so that we can help regulate the temperature by swinging it around. We're going to take these screens that we prepared earlier, turn the house on its side, lay one down, and grab our staple gun. We're just going to go right inside to wherever we can reach it and staple to get the screen in place. So there we go. Now you can see that screen. And we don't just leave it open, otherwise birds would be able to perhaps get into the colony section directly. And then we're going to flip it over and do the same over here. And then one last one. There. Now we have some screens secured on the ventilation holes, and the mudroom is done. So I'm going to grab this bag right here that has some raw cotton inside of it. And you can find raw cotton at a bird supply stores where we got this. But you don't want to use cotton balls because they're made in a way that could potentially rip the legs off of bumblebees. So the raw cotton is what we want, and we'll just rip it up, fluff it a little bit. The way that cotton balls are made causes bumblebees' legs to get stuck inside of them, so when they go to try to fly away, they will get ripped off. And that's just why we don't use cotton balls and we prefer to use raw cotton instead. So what I've done here is I've just ripped it up, fluffed it up a little bit, and made a ball out of it. And that's going to go right in the larger section here. And that will provide some nesting material for the bumblebees to make their nest in. And then what we're going to do now, because all of that is done, is grab the roof piece over here, line it up on top, and we're almost done. So we'll line this up, we'll mark where we need to drill it, and then we'll go for it. But as you can see on the sides here, we already have some screws going in horizontally here. So we want to make sure that these vertical screws aren't going to interfere with those, so we need to bring them out a little ways. And another thing to take into consideration is this hole here. We don't want a screw to go down through that hole either, so we need to maybe bring it out around here, and if we need to, put another screw in right in the center in the back if it needs a little more securing. So I am going to take this, move it over to the edge, clamp it together, and I'm going to use a hand drill, a handheld drill, to drill this together. There we go, line it all up. I'm going to start on this side closest to me. Loosen the clamp just a little bit, bring it around. And I'm actually going to mark to make sure that I don't accidentally drill out the edge of here. So I'm going to say that I want to drill right about there. And we'll mark the other side in just a few. But over here, we'll do the same. And now the top may only need 4 screws, but it may need 5 or 6 depending on how it looks when we get there. And now I didn't have that secured quite tight enough. So now that we're all secured here, I'll hold down there and drill through there and drill through over here. There we go. Grab a couple of screws. There we go, one. Secure the other part of this side. Then we'll flip it around and do the same on the other side. Have it all lined up. And now we're going to mark again where we want to drill. So about there. And then over here, we'll go approximately same across, right around there. Attach the last couple of screws. And this one's looking like it's sturdy enough without a 5th or 6th screw. So we'll leave it at 4 on the top. And there we go. We just need to attach the edge flaps, which I have right over here. I'm just going to make a little hole inside of there. And I'm just using a nail to allow a little bit easier movement when we get it all the way in. And there you can see that we have some movement, and you might need to, because this wood is thin enough, you can even just take a little box cutter or something and cut away a little bit of that so that it goes a little easier. But you can see that it becomes a ventilation flap right there. And we'll do the same on the other side. So this is just used so that, say it's hotter or colder and you need to adjust the temperature, you can open the flap and then close it again however you may need. And all of the specifications for that can be found on our website, or we'll have links to some further information and further reading about that if you'd like. Here, now that we have the ventilation flap installed, the cotton in the section back here, the corrugated cardboard up front, we have our holes aligned back here, holes aligned up front. Bumblebees will go in that hole there and then wipe whatever they don't want off in this front section, which is the mud room. In this back section with the cotton is where bumblebees would make their colony. One important thing to note about these houses, though, is that they have, because bumblebees are extremely picky about where they make their nests, have had lower success rates. But there are different experiments that you can try, like attaching a tube to the front of this, here, and running it above ground where there's a small entry hole, because oftentimes in nature bumblebees will use excavated rodent holes underground as their nesting sites. So messing around with the location, whether it be underground, sitting on top of the ground, it's really more of an experimental process. If you'd like to bury a bee house, the bumblebee house, to try it to see if you could get any bumblebees in there, you can really play around with the depth. You could go from a few inches of soil above the roof all the way down to maybe a foot under. There are different depths that you can experiment with is really the key, because like I mentioned, bumblebees are extremely picky about where they make their nests, and different bumblebees are different. I have a bumblebee house in my backyard propped up on some bricks so that it's not directly on the ground, which makes it more susceptible to rotting quicker. You could also try to hang it, but this house is definitely more of an experimental project. If you'd like something that has a little more proven success, I would recommend going over and checking out how to build an advanced solitary bee house, or just a solitary bee house in general, because I personally have seen some proven success with those. If you'd like to decorate these, you can. I am going to add a weatherproof sticker here that 3M made for us, and this one here has a clear back, so I'll just peel it off. And I think I'm going to move the flap out of the way, put it right there, line it up, and just smooth it on. But you can also paint the houses with non-toxic paint. There are really a large variety of different ways to decorate, or you don't even have to decorate your bee house. But we just like adding this because it's a nice little personal touch. And the creativity here, really endless. You can also mess around with different shapes, but this is a nice basic method in making a bee house like this.